The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Rawlins, Wyoming, as Zeke Garrison dragged his wounded body through the saloon doors, leaving a trail of crimson droplets on the weathered wooden planks. A hush fell over the crowded room, all eyes turning to the notorious gunslinger, whose legend had grown larger than the man himself could bear. It was 1878, a time when the promise of prosperity drew hopefuls westward, and the harsh reality of frontier life broke most who dared the journey. Among those watching the wounded man stumble was Tamara Sullivan, the town's new doctor who had arrived just 3 weeks prior with medical knowledge, stubborn determination, and secrets of her own. "Somebody help him," Tamara commanded, her voice cutting through the silence as she rushed forward, catching Zeke's weight as he collapsed. The tall cowboy's eyes, blue as a summer sky yet cold as winter ice, met hers with suspicion. "Leave me be," he muttered, the scent of whiskey mingling with the metallic smell of blood. "I ain't worth saving." But Tamara Sullivan had not traveled 2,000 miles west to let a man bleed out on a saloon floor, no matter how determined he seemed to meet his maker. "I'll be the judge of that," she replied, her trained hands already assessing the gunshot wound in his side. Zeke Garrison had been riding with a death wish since the war. Once a decorated Union soldier, now a hired gun with more enemies than friends, he found himself unexpectedly in the care of a woman whose touch was as gentle as her eyes were fierce. "Get him to my clinic," Tamara ordered 2 burly men who had recovered from their initial shock. They hefted Zeke's considerable frame, ignoring his growled protests. "I told you to let me be," he snarled at the doctor, trying to push away her helping hands. "And I choose not to listen to fools," Tamara replied evenly, pressing a clean cloth against his wound as they moved toward the door. What neither of them realized as they left the saloon that evening was how their lives would intertwine through a brutal winter and into the unforgiving spring. She couldn't have known that beneath his hardened exterior lay a man shattered by the horrors he'd witnessed and committed. He would never have believed that her determined hands could hold together the broken pieces of a soul he'd long given up on saving. The makeshift surgery in Tamara's clinic was illuminated by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across the walls. Zeke lay unconscious on her table, stripped of his blood-soaked shirt, revealing not just the fresh wound but a map of scars that told stories of violence and survival. "He's lost a lot of blood," Tamara murmured to herself as she worked to extract the bullet. Her assistant, an older woman named Martha who had midwifed half the town's children, stood nearby, handing instruments and clean cloths as needed. "That's Zeke Garrison," Martha whispered, her voice tinged with awe and fear. "They say he's killed 20 men. Today I'm not concerned with what he's done," Tamara replied, focused on her task. "Only with keeping him from dying." The bullet had missed vital organs by mere inches. As Tamara stitched the wound closed with practiced precision, she studied the unconscious man's face. The hard lines of his jaw, the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the way pain creased his forehead even in unconsciousness all spoke of a life lived on the edge of violence. 3 hours later, when Zeke finally stirred, Tamara was sitting beside the bed, updating her medical journal. His hand shot out with surprising strength, grabbing her wrist. "Where am I?" His voice was gravel and sand. "My clinic. You've been shot." She gently but firmly removed his hand from her wrist. "The bullet's out. You'll live, though I suspect that disappoints you." A humorless laugh escaped his cracked lips. "You got sharp eyes, Doc. Sharp enough to see a man trying to die." She poured water into a cup and helped him drink. "Why were you shot?" Zeke regarded her through narrowed eyes. "Why'd you save me? I'm a doctor. It's what I do." "You're a woman." His statement held no judgment, merely observation. "Your powers of deduction are remarkable," she replied dryly. "Does that fact trouble you?" "Doesn't trouble me none." He shifted, wincing at the pain. "Just ain't met many female sawbones." "Well, now you have." Tamara checked his bandage. "Who shot you, Mr. Garrison?" "Man who thought I killed his brother." Zeke's eyes drifted toward the window where darkness had fallen completely. He was right. Tamara's hand stilled momentarily before resuming their work. Was it self-defense? Does it matter? It might to the sheriff. A bark of laughter, followed by a grimace of pain. "Sheriff Daniels and me have an understanding. I don't cause trouble in his town. He doesn't ask questions about my business elsewhere. Convenient arrangement." Tamara's tone made it clear what she thought of such an understanding. "World ain't black and white, Doc." Zeke attempted to sit up but fell back with a grunt. "Specially not out here." "Rest," she commanded. "You've lost too much blood to be moving about. You'll stay here tonight where I can monitor you." "I don't need— This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Garrison. I didn't spend 3 hours saving your life to have you undo my work through stubborn pride." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at being spoken to so directly. After a moment, he settled back against the pillow. "Zeke," he said finally. "Nobody calls me Mr. Garrison except undertakers and lawmen." "Very well, Zeke." Tamara stood, smoothing her skirts. "I'm Dr. Sullivan, but as my patient you may call me Tamara." "Tamara," he repeated, testing the name. "Pretty name for a—" "For a what?" Her eyebrow arched challengingly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "For a doctor with hands steady enough to dig lead out of a man's gut." She nodded, accepting the compliment. "Try to sleep. I'll check on you through the night." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her at the door. "Why'd you really save me, Doc?" "Town like this, you must have heard who I am by now." Tamara looked back at him, her expression unreadable in the lamplight. "I don't believe a person is only the sum of the stories told about them. Good night, Zeke." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Zeke Garrison alone with thoughts he'd been running from for years, and the strange comfort of being in the care of someone who looked at him and saw something worth saving. Morning light filtered through the clinic's small windows when Zeke next opened his eyes. For a disoriented moment, he couldn't place where he was. The clean sheets and antiseptic smell were a far cry from the dingy hotel rooms and campgrounds that had been his temporary homes. A movement caught his attention. Tamara Sullivan sat at a small desk, her copper-colored hair pulled back in a practical bun, writing in what appeared to be a ledger. She must have sensed his gaze, for she looked up and met his eyes. "Good morning," she said, setting down her pen. "How's the pain?" Zeke took stock of his body. "Been worse," he answered truthfully. "That's not exactly informative." She approached the bed, her skirts swishing softly against the wooden floor. "I need to check your wound." He submitted to her examination with uncharacteristic docility. Her hands were cool against his fever-warm skin as she removed the bandage. The professional detachment in her touch was something unfamiliar to Zeke, who was accustomed to women either fearing him or seeking proximity for reasons that had nothing to do with care. "The wound looks clean," Tamara pronounced, applying a fresh bandage. "No signs of infection yet, but we'll need to watch it closely." "How long are you aiming to keep me here?" Zeke asked, his discomfort with being confined evident in his tone. "Until I'm satisfied you won't tear open my stitches at the first opportunity." She fixed him with a stern look. "At least 2 days of bed rest. After that, limited movement for another week." "A week?" Zeke's expression darkened. "I can't stay in Rawlins that long." "You can and you will unless you're eager to bleed out on the trail." Tamara crossed her arms. "What's so urgent that it can't wait for proper healing?" Zeke looked away. "Got business elsewhere." "Business that involves more shooting, I presume?" His silence was answer enough. Tamara sighed. "Well, your business will have to wait. I'm not releasing you until that wound has started to properly heal, and that's final." She moved toward the door. "I'll bring you some breakfast. Try not to do anything foolish in my absence." Left alone, Zeke carefully pushed himself to a sitting position. The movement sent pain lancing through his side, confirming the doctor's assessment of his condition. With a frustrated grunt, he surveyed the small room. His gun belt hung on a peg near the door, the revolver still in its holster. She hadn't disarmed him, an unusual choice for someone who clearly disapproved of his profession. The door opened again, and Tamara returned with a tray bearing a bowl of oatmeal, bread, and coffee. She paused, noticing his upright position. "I see you're testing my patience already," she commented, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Just sitting," he defended. "How's a man supposed to eat lying flat?" Fair point. She adjusted his pillows to better support his back. "The man who shot you, will he be back to finish the job?" Zeke took the bowl she offered. "No, he's either halfway to Denver by now or dead in an alley." Tamara's eyes widened slightly. "Dead?" I shot back, Zeke said simply, as if discussing the weather. "Don't know if I hit him fatal, didn't stick around to check." Tamara's lips pressed into a tight line. "I see." She busied herself tidying medical supplies on a nearby shelf, her back to him. "And is there anyone else in town who might wish you harm?" Zeke studied her rigid posture, realizing she was genuinely concerned about potential danger coming to her clinic. "No one specific," he finally answered. "But in my line of work, it's best not to linger anywhere too long." She turned back to face him, her expression composed once more. "What exactly is your line of work, Mr. Garrison? Beyond the obvious skill with firearms." "Bounty hunting, mostly," he replied after a moment's hesitation. "Some protective work for stagecoach companies, whatever pays. And requires a gun," she added. He shrugged, then winced at the movement. "It's what I'm good at." "I find it hard to believe that killing is the only skill you possess." Her words, spoken without judgment but with clear skepticism, caused Zeke to study her more carefully. Tamara Sullivan was not like any doctor or any woman he had encountered before. She spoke directly, without the coyness or fear he typically inspired. Her clothing was practical but feminine, her hands capable but uncalloused. She had the bearing of someone educated in the East. "What brings a female doctor to Wyoming territory?" he asked, deflecting her assessment. "Seems like Boston or New York would offer more. Civilization." A shadow passed over her features. "Perhaps I've had enough of civilization." Before he could press further, a commotion outside the clinic drew their attention. Voices raised in alarm, followed by hurried footsteps on the porch. The door burst open, revealing a frantic-looking young man, hat clutched in his hands. "Doc Sullivan, there's been an accident at the mine." "Cave in. Men trapped." Tamara was already moving, gathering supplies into a bag. "How many injured? Don't know yet. At least 5 men were down in that section." She nodded briskly. "Tell them I'll be there directly." As the messenger departed, she turned back to Zeke. "I have to go." "Stay in that bed. There's water and more bread if you need it." "Wait," Zeke called as she reached the door. "You're going alone. Mining accidents are messy business." Her gaze was steady. "I'm the only doctor in Rawlins. Who else would go?" With that, she was gone, leaving Zeke with a strange hollow feeling in his chest that had nothing to do with his wound. It had been a long time since he'd witnessed someone rushing toward danger for the purpose of helping others, rather than causing harm. Despite Tamara's instructions, Zeke found himself unable to remain idle. After finishing his meal, he carefully swung his legs over the side of the bed, testing his strength. The room swam momentarily, but he gritted his teeth against the dizziness and pain. Using the wall for support, he made his way to the window that overlooked the town's main street. Rawlins was typical of the new settlements sprouting across the Wyoming territory, a cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by the vast, untamed wilderness. The Union Pacific Railroad had brought the town into existence just a decade earlier, and like many such places, it existed in that tenuous space between lawlessness and civilization. From his vantage point, Zeke could see a group of men rushing toward the northern edge of town, where the coal mines lay. The mines were the lifeblood of Rawlins, providing both jobs and the coal that fed the hungry steam engines of the railroad. As he watched, he noticed a familiar figure on horseback, Sheriff Daniels, heading in the same direction. The lawman was competent enough, but Zeke knew from experience that mining accidents required more than law enforcement. They needed strong backs, steady hands, and someone unafraid of tight, dangerous spaces. Before he fully processed what he was doing, Zeke had retrieved his shirt and gun belt. The shirt was ruined, with a ragged bullet hole and bloodstains, but he pulled it on anyway. Each movement sent fire through his side, but a lifetime of pushing through pain served him well now. By the time he made it out of the clinic and onto the street, he was sweating and lightheaded. A few townspeople gave him curious or fearful glances, but no one approached the notorious gunslinger. Zeke commandeered a horse that was hitched outside the general store, promising himself he'd return it later. The ride to the mine, though less than a mile, tested the limits of his endurance. By the time he arrived, a crowd had gathered around the mine entrance. Men were shouting orders, women were crying, and the acrid smell of coal dust hung in the air. Zeke dismounted carefully, trying not to reopen his wound. He scanned the chaotic scene until he spotted Tamara. She had set up a makeshift treatment area and was already attending to a miner who had escaped the collapse, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she cleaned a gash on the man's forehead. As if sensing his presence, she looked up, her eyes widening in disbelief and then narrowing in anger when she saw him. Saying something to her patient, she rose and strode toward Zeke. "What in God's name are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. "Are you trying to kill yourself?" "Heard there was trouble," Zeke replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Thought you might need help." "I need patients who follow medical advice, not add to my workload," she retorted, but her anger seemed tempered by surprise at his appearance. "You're in no condition to be here." A shout from the mine entrance interrupted them. "We've cleared a path. Need men to go in after the trapped workers." Zeke straightened, ignoring the stabbing pain in his side. "I'm going." "You absolutely are not." Tamara grabbed his arm. "You've lost blood, you have a serious wound, and you could tear open your stitches. You'd be a liability." "I've been in mine collapses before," Zeke countered. "During the war, I know how to move in tight spaces without causing further collapse." Tamara's grip on his arm tightened. "Why are you doing this? These aren't your people. This isn't your fight." Zeke met her questioning gaze. "Maybe I'm tired of taking lives instead of saving them." Something shifted in her expression, a flash of understanding or recognition. After a moment's hesitation, she released his arm and reached into her medical bag, withdrawing a small bottle. "Laudanum," she explained. "For the pain. Take only a small sip, enough to function, not enough to dull your senses." Her voice became clinical, professional. "If you feel the wound reopen, warm wetness on your side, come out immediately. Don't try to be a hero." Zeke accepted the bottle, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Yes, madam." As he turned toward the mine entrance, she called after him. "Zeke." He looked back. "Be careful." The darkness of the mine swallowed him as he joined the rescue party. The tunnel was narrow, the air thick with coal dust that coated his throat and lungs. Wooden support beams groaned under the pressure of the earth above, threatening further collapse. Led by the mine foreman, a grizzled man named Holt, the rescue party inched forward, clearing debris as they went. The work was slow and dangerous, each shifted rock potentially triggering another cave-in. 3 men were working the face when it collapsed, Holt explained between labored breaths. 2 more went in to help and got caught when the secondary collapse happened. Zeke nodded, conserving his strength as they progressed deeper into the earth. The wound in his side burned with each movement, the laudanum providing just enough relief to keep him on his feet. He found himself wondering what Tamara would say if she could see him now, crawling through the bowels of the earth with a freshly stitched gunshot wound. After what seemed like hours, they heard a faint calling from beyond a wall of fallen rock and timber. "We're here," came the muffled shout. "Air's getting thin. Hold on," Holt called back. "We're coming through." The rescue party worked with renewed vigor, carefully removing the debris that separated them from the trapped miners. Zeke's world narrowed to the task at hand: lift, clear, breathe, repeat. The pain in his side became a distant concern compared to the urgency of reaching the men before their air ran out. When they finally broke through, they found the 5 miners huddled in a small pocket created by a fallen support beam. 2 were unconscious, 1 had a clearly broken leg, but all were alive. The extraction was painstaking. Each injured man had to be carefully moved through the unstable tunnel to safety. Zeke and another rescuer carried the miner with the broken leg, the man's cries of pain echoing off the close walls of the mine shaft. By the time they emerged into daylight, Zeke's shirt was soaked with sweat and fresh blood. The stitches had indeed torn, just as Tamara had predicted. But seeing the relief on the faces of the waiting families made the pain worthwhile. As the last miner was brought to safety, Zeke's strength finally gave out. His knees buckled, and he would have fallen if strong hands hadn't caught him. Through a gray haze, he looked up to see Sheriff Daniels supporting him. "Didn't expect to see you playing hero, Garrison," the lawman remarked, helping him toward Tamara's treatment area. "Not playing at anything," Zeke managed to reply before his vision tunneled and darkness claimed him. He awoke to the familiar ceiling of Tamara's clinic and the sensation of being stitched up again. Night had fallen, and the room was lit by the warm glow of oil lamps. Tamara was bent over his reopened wound, her face a mask of concentration as she worked. "You're an idiot," she said without looking up, apparently having sensed his return to consciousness. "A brave idiot, but an idiot nonetheless." Zeke couldn't suppress a weak chuckle. "That your professional medical opinion, Doc?" "It is." She tied off the last stitch and straightened, fixing him with a stern gaze that couldn't quite hide her concern. "You could have died in that mine. Your body was in no condition for that kind of exertion." "The men needed help," he said simply. "And now you've set your recovery back by at least a week." Tamara began cleaning her instruments, her movements betraying her fatigue. "Which means you're stuck in my care that much longer." "Worse fates, I suppose," Zeke murmured, watching her work. He hesitated, then asked, "The miners?" "They all make it," something in her expression softened. "Yes, all 5 will recover, thanks in part to your foolhardy heroics." She set down her tools and approached the bed, pressing a cool hand to his forehead to check for fever. "The whole town's talking about it. The notorious Zeke Garrison, risking his life to save coal miners." "Don't much care for talk," he replied, uncomfortably aware of her touch. "No, I don't imagine you do." Tamara pulled up a chair beside the bed, seemingly too tired to maintain her professional distance. "Why did you really do it? And don't tell me it was just because they needed help." Zeke was silent for a long moment, considering her question. In truth, he wasn't entirely sure himself. The impulse to go to the mine had been sudden and powerful, overwhelming his usual caution. "During the war," he finally said, his voice low, "I was trapped once. Tunnel collapsed during a siege, 3 days in the dark, waiting to die." He swallowed hard, the memory still vivid after all these years. Nobody should die like that, buried alive, running out of air. Tamara's expression was thoughtful. "So you know what it's like, to be trapped?" "Yes." The word hung between them, laden with meanings beyond the physical experience he described. She studied him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted to reveal. "You're not what I expected, Zeke Garrison. And what did you expect? A cold-blooded killer, a man who cares only for money and his next drink." She shrugged slightly. "The rumors paint quite a picture." "Maybe the rumors ain't wrong," Zeke countered. "One good deed doesn't wash away the blood on my hands." "Perhaps not," she acknowledged, "but it does suggest there's more to you than your reputation." Uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, Zeke changed the subject. "What about you, Doc? What brought you all the way out here?" "Can't imagine lady doctors are so common that Wyoming territory seemed like the obvious choice." A shadow crossed her face, and for a moment he thought she might refuse to answer. But then she sighed, settling back in her chair. "I graduated from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania 2 years ago," she began. "One of the few institutions that will train female physicians. I worked in Philadelphia afterward, but—" She trailed off, her gaze distant. "Let's just say certain circumstances made it prudent for me to seek opportunities elsewhere." "Running from something?" Zeke asked, recognizing the evasion for what it was. Her eyes snapped back to his, a flash of defensiveness in them. "Aren't we all in some way?" Zeke conceded the point with a slight nod. "Fair enough." "The Western Territories need doctors desperately," Tamara continued after a moment. "Female doctors may not be welcomed in Eastern hospitals, but out here people care more about whether you can set a bone or deliver a baby than what your gender might be." "Still can't be easy," Zeke observed. "Being a woman alone out here. No easier or harder than being a gunslinger with a reputation that follows you everywhere, I imagine." Her retort held no malice, just a simple statement of fact. "We all have our burdens to carry." The conversation lapsed into silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable one. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, Zeke recognized in Tamara a kindred spirit of sorts, someone who had made difficult choices, who carried secrets and scars, who had found their way to this remote corner of Wyoming seeking something they couldn't find elsewhere. "You should rest," Tamara said finally, rising from her chair. "And this time, please stay in bed until I tell you otherwise." "Yes, madam," Zeke replied, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Doctor's orders." She paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Good night, Zeke." "Good night, Tamara." As the door closed behind her, Zeke found himself wondering what circumstances had driven an educated Eastern woman to seek refuge in a rough mining town. Whatever her secrets, they were hers to keep or share as she chose. He of all people understood the value of privacy. With that thought, he surrendered to the exhaustion pulling at him, falling into a deep sleep free of the nightmares that usually plagued him. The next week passed in a strange rhythm of convalescence. True to his word, Zeke remained in bed as instructed, allowing his body the rest it needed to heal. Tamara divided her time between tending to her other patients and checking on her most troublesome one. Their conversations gradually extended beyond medical matters. Tamara spoke of her training, of the challenges of being one of the few female physicians in the country. Zeke, typically reticent about his past, found himself sharing carefully edited stories of his travels across the untamed West. What neither of them discussed were the deeper matters his life as a gunfighter, or whatever had driven her from Philadelphia. Those subjects remained veiled in mutual, unspoken agreement. On the 8th day after the mining accident, Tamara declared Zeke fit enough to take short walks outside the clinic. The fresh air was a welcome relief after days of confinement, though he found the curious stares of townspeople unsettling. "They're not used to seeing you without a gun on your hip," Tamara observed as they slowly walked the length of the main street. She had insisted on accompanying him for his first venture outdoors, ostensibly to monitor his condition. "I'm wearing my gun," Zeke pointed out. Indeed, his revolver was in its customary place at his side. Some habits couldn't be broken, even for a doctor's orders. "Yes, but you're not using it," she replied. "That's the novelty." A group of children playing near the general store stopped to stare at them. One small boy, no more than 6 or 7, broke away from his friends and approached cautiously. "Are you really Zeke Garrison?" the boy asked, wide-eyed. "My pa says you killed 20 men in a gunfight in Cheyenne." Zeke's expression darkened. "Your pa's mistaken, boy." "Oh." The child looked disappointed. "So you didn't kill 20 men?" "Not in Cheyenne," Zeke clarified, his voice flat. "And not all at once." The boy's eyes grew even wider before his mother hurried over, pulling him away with a fearful glance at Zeke. "I'm sorry, doctor." "Sullivan," she murmured, then hustled her son back to their home. Tamara watched the interaction with a thoughtful expression. "Is it true? About the men you've killed?" Zeke resumed walking, his pace quickening despite the pull on his healing wound. "Does it matter?" "I suppose that depends on why you killed them. Some deserved it, some didn't." His voice was tight. "That's the truth of it. Not a pretty one, but there it is." Tamara matched his stride, seemingly undeterred by his curt response. "And how does one determine who deserves to die?" Zeke stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "You asking as a doctor or as a judge?" "I'm asking as someone trying to understand the man whose life I saved," she replied evenly. "The same man who risked that life to save others." Her directness caught him off guard. Most people either feared him too much to ask such questions or were too eager to believe the worst about him. Tamara's genuine curiosity, free of obvious judgment, was unfamiliar territory. "After the war," he began slowly, "I tried going straight, ranching in Colorado. Indians raided. Killed my partner, burned everything. The memories surfaced like stones in a river, long submerged but never gone. I tracked them, killed them, found I had a talent for hunting men. And that became your life." It wasn't a question, but Zeke nodded anyway. "Became what I was good at. What people paid me for." He gazed down the dusty street where ordinary people went about their ordinary lives. "Started with men who deserved it, murderers, rapists, thieves, but after a while." He trailed off. "After a while the lines blurred," Tamara finished for him. "Something like that." Zeke resumed walking, slower now. "Not proud of it, just is what it is." Tamara was quiet for several steps before asking, "Have you ever considered another path?" The question struck Zeke as both naive and profound. "Men like me don't get second chances, Doc. I don't believe that." Her voice was soft but certain. "Everyone can change if they truly want to." "That sounds like something they teach in those fancy Eastern medical schools," Zeke remarked, deflecting with sarcasm. "No," Tamara replied, unfazed by his tone. "That's something I learned from watching people heal not just bodies but lives. I've seen drunkards become sober, criminals become honest men, the hopeless find purpose. And you think I could be one of your redemption stories?" Zeke couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Tamara stopped walking, forcing him to turn and face her. I think you already started writing that story yourself when you went into that mine knowing you might not come out." Her words hung in the air between them, challenging and comforting all at once. Zeke found himself unable to hold her gaze, turning instead to look at the distant mountains that ringed the valley. "Maybe," he conceded finally, "or maybe old dogs can't learn new tricks." "Well, you're hardly old," Tamara observed with a hint of a smile. "Stubborn, yes. Old, no." The unexpected comment startled a laugh from Zeke. 35. Feel older some days." 35 is positively youthful," she replied, her smile widening. "Plenty of time for a new chapter." Their eyes met again, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that transcended their roles as doctor and patient. For perhaps the first time since arriving in Rawlins, Zeke saw Tamara not just as the woman who had saved his life, but as a person with her own desires and dreams. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Sheriff Daniels rode toward them, his expression grim. He reined in his horse beside them, tipping his hat to Tamara. "Dr. Sullivan." He nodded, then turned to Zeke. "Garrison, thought you'd want to know. 3 riders just got into town, asking after you. Don't look like the friendly sort." Zeke's hand instinctively moved to his revolver. Description: 2 older fellows, hard-looking. 1 younger man, fancy clothes, said they had business with you. The sheriff's emphasis made the nature of that business clear. "Where are they now?" "Hotel. Told them you were laid up, recovering from a wound. They seemed content to wait." Daniels glanced at Tamara. "Might want to get the doc here somewhere safe, case they decide waiting isn't to their taste." "I can take care of myself, Sheriff," Tamara stated firmly. "No doubt, madam, but these aren't the kind of men who care much about niceties like not harming women." The sheriff turned back to Zeke. "I can run them out of town if you want. After what you did at the mine, folks around here are inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt." Zeke considered the offer. It would be the simplest solution. Let Daniels handle it, avoid confrontation while he was still healing. But something in him rebelled against the idea of others fighting his battles. "No," he decided. "I'll deal with them. Just need to know who I'm dealing with first." "Thought you might say that." Daniels reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Young one's carrying this. Dropped it at the saloon while getting a drink. One of my deputies picked it up." Zeke took the paper and unfolded it. It was a wanted poster with his likeness, offering $5,000 for his capture or proof of death. The charge: murder of one Thomas Blackwell in Denver. "I didn't kill any Thomas Blackwell," Zeke said, frowning at the poster. "Figured as much," Daniels replied. "Bounty's mighty high, though, tempting for men of a certain disposition." Zeke refolded the poster. "Thanks for the warning. Consider it payment for the mining rescue." Daniels tipped his hat again. "I'll keep an eye on them, but can't promise more without cause. They haven't broken any laws yet." As the sheriff rode away, Tamara turned to Zeke with concern etched on her features. "You need to leave town." "Can't outrun them in my condition," Zeke replied, already calculating his options. "And I won't bring trouble to your door or to this town." "Then what will you do?" Zeke looked down at the wanted poster in his hand. "Find out who's behind this false bounty, clear my name." "And how exactly do you plan to do that while nursing a healing gunshot wound?" Tamara demanded. "One step at a time," Zeke answered, his gaze returning to the hotel down the street where his would-be captors waited. "Starting with a conversation." "A conversation that could get you killed," Tamara pointed out. "You're in no condition for a gunfight." "Then I'll have to be persuasive without my gun." Zeke's mouth set in a determined line. "Time to head back to the clinic, Doc. I've got plans to make." The walk back was silent, each lost in thought. As they reached the clinic, Zeke paused at the door. "You should stay with friends tonight," he suggested. Somewhere those men won't find you if they come looking. Tamara's chin lifted stubbornly. This is my clinic, my home. I won't be driven from it by threats. They'll use you to get to me, Zeke warned. Men like that don't have scruples. Then we'll face them together. Her eyes held his, unwavering. Unless you're planning to sneak away while I'm asleep. Zeke couldn't help but admire her courage, even as he worried for her safety. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Doc. I'll take that as a compliment. She opened the door, gesturing for him to enter. Now, let's tend to your wound and discuss these plans of yours. If you're determined to face these men, you'll do it with as much of your strength recovered as possible. Inside the clinic, Tamara checked Zeke's wound, relieved to find that their walk hadn't caused any setbacks in his healing. As she applied a fresh bandage, her fingers lingered momentarily on the scarred skin surrounding the newer injury. "How did you get this one?" she asked, tracing a long, jagged scar that ran from his ribs toward his back. "Comanche Raid, 71, Zeke replied, watching her face as she worked. "Arrow. Had to pull it out myself." Tamara winced at the thought. "And this?" Her fingers moved to a round, puckered scar on his upper chest. "Bullet, Dodge City. 74. You've led a dangerous life, Mr. Garrison. Just noticing that now, are you?" A hint of amusement colored his tone. Tamara secured the bandage and stepped back, her professional demeanor returning. "Your body's a map of violence. Each scar tells a story of pain and survival." "Not much else to tell," Zeke said, pulling his shirt back on. "That's been my life. It doesn't have to remain so." Tamara began putting away her medical supplies, her back to him. "The men you've been, the things you've done, they don't dictate who you can become." Zeke watched her methodical movements, struck by the certainty in her voice. "You sound mighty sure about that." "I am." She turned to face him again. "I've seen it happen. People change when given reason and opportunity." "And what reason would a man like me have to change his ways?" Zeke asked, genuinely curious about her answer. Tamara held his gaze steadily. "Perhaps the same reason you went into that mine. The desire to be something more than what the world expects of you." Her words struck closer to home than Zeke cared to admit. He'd never articulated, even to himself, the restlessness that had been growing inside him in recent years. The increasing emptiness of the life he'd built, the mounting toll of violence and solitude. Before he could formulate a response, a knock at the clinic door interrupted them. Tamara crossed the room and opened it cautiously, revealing Martha, her assistant. "Evening, Dr. Sullivan." Martha's eyes darted nervously to Zeke before returning to Tamara. "Just wanted to check if you needed anything before I head home. There's talk about those strangers in town. Folks are worried they might be trouble." "We'll be fine, Martha. Thank you for your concern." Tamara's tone was reassuring but firm. "I'll see you tomorrow morning." After Martha left, Tamara secured the door and drew the curtains across the clinic's front windows. "News travels fast in small towns," she observed. "Always does," Zeke agreed, rising carefully from the examination table. "All the more reason for you to stay elsewhere tonight." "We've already settled that matter," Tamara replied firmly. "Now, about these plans of yours." Zeke sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing further. "The way I see it, I have two options. Wait for them to make a move or approach them directly. Neither sounds particularly safe. Safety ain't exactly a luxury I can afford right now." Zeke moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains at the darkening street outside. "But I can't keep hiding in your clinic forever." "No, you can't," Tamara agreed, surprising him. "So we need a strategy that doesn't involve you getting shot again." Zeke turned to look at her. "There's no we in this, Doc. This is my problem." "It became my problem when you showed up bleeding on my operating table," Tamara countered. And it certainly became my problem when men with false wanted posters came to town looking for you. Zeke studied her determined expression, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. You always involve yourself in your patient's troubles, only the interesting ones. The hint of a smile touched her lips. Now, tell me what you know about Thomas Blackwell, the man you supposedly murdered. Zeke shook his head. Never heard the name before today. Then who would want you dead badly enough to put a false bounty on your head? That list might be longer than I care to admit, Zeke replied dryly. But for this kind of money, has to be someone with means. Tamara considered this. The young man in fancy clothes, he might be our key. If he's wealthy enough to post such a bounty, why come himself? Why not just hire bounty hunters? Good question. Zeke rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Could be personal, revenge maybe, for something you did or something he believes you did. Either's possible. Zeke returned to the chair, easing himself down as his side began to throb. I've made enemies. Some deserved, some not. Tamara paced the small room, her mind working through the puzzle. We need information about this Blackwell person, about the young man at the hotel. We again, Zeke noted. Tamara stopped pacing to look at him directly. Yes, we. Unless you'd prefer to face 3 armed men alone while still recovering from a serious wound. Put that way, Zeke had to concede the point. What do you suggest, then? I can make inquiries, Tamara said. As the town doctor, I have reason to know about new arrivals. People talk to me. Too dangerous, Zeke objected immediately. If they suspect you're helping me, they won't, Tamara interrupted confidently. I'm simply a concerned physician checking on potential patients. Nothing suspicious about that. Zeke wanted to argue further, but he had to admit her plan made sense. And in his current condition, his options were limited. Fine, he relented. But you approach them in public, in daylight, and you don't take any risks. I'm a woman living alone in a frontier town, Tamara replied with a wry smile. Risk is relative. As night fell, they continued refining their strategy. Tamara prepared a simple dinner, and they ate together at the small table in her living quarters behind the clinic. The domesticity of the scene struck Zeke as oddly comforting, a glimpse of a life he had never expected to experience. Where will you go? Tamara asked suddenly, setting down her fork. After this is resolved, I mean. The question caught Zeke off guard. Haven't thought that far ahead. Perhaps it's time you did. Her gaze was steady, challenging. You said yourself that your current path isn't one you're proud of. Changing ain't as simple as deciding to do it, Zeke pointed out. A man with my reputation doesn't just start fresh. No, Tamara agreed, but he can begin making different choices. Small ones at first, perhaps. Then larger ones. Zeke studied her across the table, this woman who had saved his life and now seemed determined to save something more. Why do you care what becomes of me? The question hung in the air between them. Tamara's eyes dropped to her plate momentarily before meeting his again. Because I've seen glimpses of the man beneath the gunslinger, she answered softly. A man who risked his life for strangers, who feels remorse for past actions, who might want something more but doesn't believe it's possible. Her words struck a chord so deep within him that Zeke had to look away, uncomfortable with the emotion they stirred. No one had seen him so clearly in years, perhaps ever. And what about you? He asked, deflecting. What do you want that brought you all the way out here? Tamara's expression became guarded. I told you, I came where doctors were needed. That's the reason you give, not the truth behind it. Zeke leaned forward slightly. You're running from something too, Doc. I can recognize the signs. For a moment he thought she might deny it. Instead, she sighed, her shoulders dropping slightly as if releasing a burden. I was engaged, she began, her voice quiet but steady, to another doctor in Philadelphia, a respected surgeon from a prominent family. The match was considered quite advantageous for a female physician with no connections. Zeke remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. I discovered he was experimenting on patients, poor women from the slums, immigrants who wouldn't be missed. Testing surgical techniques without consent, without proper precautions. Her hands tightened around her cup. When I confronted him, he threatened to destroy my reputation, my career. Said no one would believe a woman over him. Did you report him anyway? Zeke asked, already suspecting the answer. Tamara nodded. To the hospital board. They dismissed my concerns without investigation. Then came the rumors that I was unstable, hysterical, vindictive over a broken engagement. So you left. I had no choice. Her voice hardened with remembered anger. But I also refused to be silenced. I wrote to medical journals detailing his methods. Most wouldn't publish my letters, but one did anonymously. And now you're hiding in Wyoming. Tamara's chin lifted defiantly. Not hiding, starting over. Building a practice where I'm judged by my skills, not my gender or my willingness to overlook cruelty. Zeke felt a new respect blooming for this woman who had risked everything for her principles. Your fiancé, he's still in Philadelphia, as far as I know. Tamara's eyes narrowed slightly. Why do you ask? Just curious about the man foolish enough to lose someone like you, Zeke replied, the honesty of the statement surprising even himself. A flush colored Tamara's cheeks. He didn't lose me, I left him. There's a difference. A significant one, Zeke agreed, holding her gaze until she looked away. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished their meal, but something had changed between them. Secrets shared, however partially, had created a new understanding. Later, as Zeke settled onto the narrow cot in the clinic's back room where he'd been staying during his recovery, he found himself thinking about Tamara's words regarding change and choices. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, one not defined by violence and solitude. It was a dangerous thought, more unsettling than the armed men waiting for him at the hotel. Because unlike those men, this new possibility had the power to touch parts of himself he'd long believed beyond redemption. Morning arrived with a clarity that often follows difficult revelations. Zeke awoke feeling stronger than he had since being shot, his mind sharper, more focused. He found Tamara already dressed and preparing for the day, her copper hair neatly pinned, her manner composed. I'll visit the hotel around midday, she informed him over breakfast. The dining room will be busy enough to provide safety, but not so crowded that conversation would be impossible. Zeke nodded, not bothering to renew his objections. Once Tamara Sullivan made up her mind, he was learning little could sway her. Be careful, he said instead. Men like that can smell deception. Then I won't deceive them, Tamara replied simply. I'll be exactly what I appear to be, a doctor concerned about potential patients in her town. After she departed for her morning rounds, Zeke tested his mobility, pleased to find that his strength was returning. The wound still pulled when he moved too quickly, but he could now draw his gun without the searing pain that had hampered him earlier. Sheriff Daniels stopped by mid-morning, ostensibly to check on Zeke's recovery, but clearly seeking information about his intentions regarding the bounty hunters. Town's on edge, the lawman reported. Those three haven't caused trouble yet, but folks are nervous. Especially after what happened at the mine, seems people have decided you're worth worrying about now. Tell them not to bother, Zeke replied. I'll handle my business and be gone. Daniels studied him with shrewd eyes. That include the doctor? Zeke's expression hardened. What's that supposed to mean? Just observing that Dr. Sullivan seems to have taken a personal interest in your well-being. The sheriff's tone remained neutral. She's well respected here. Would be a shame if trouble found her because of her association with you. I'm aware of the risks, Zeke said coldly. Are you suggesting I leave town without resolving this bounty situation? I'm suggesting you consider all the consequences of your actions, Daniels clarified. For everyone involved. The implication was clear. Tamara's reputation, her very ability to practice medicine in Rawlins, could be compromised by her connection to him. It was a sobering thought, one that reinforced Zeke's determination to resolve the situation quickly and then move on. After the sheriff left, Zeke paced the small clinic, checking his revolver, planning his approach. When noon arrived with no sign of Tamara returning, he found himself growing increasingly anxious. Had something gone wrong at the hotel? Had the bounty hunters somehow discovered her intention to help him? Just as he was considering going to look for her, the clinic door opened and Tamara entered, her expression troubled but determined. What happened? Zeke asked immediately, noting the tension in her shoulders. Tamara removed her bonnet, setting it aside with deliberate care. I met them, or rather I observed them while treating a hotel maid with a scalded hand. She turned to face him fully. The young man is named James Blackwell. Blackwell, Zeke repeated, making the connection. Related to the man I supposedly killed, his son. Tamara moved to the window, peering out as if checking whether she'd been followed. He's perhaps 22, well-dressed, educated speech. The other two are hired guns, I'd wager. Older, hard-faced men who deferred to him despite clearly being experienced killers themselves. Did they speak to you? Briefly. Tamara turned back to him. I introduced myself as the town physician, offered my services should they need medical attention during their stay. James Blackwell was polite but dismissive. One of his men seemed more interested, asked how long I'd been in Rawlins. What did you tell him? The truth that I arrived 3 months ago. She frowned slightly. He asked if I'd treated many gunshot wounds since coming west. I said several, including a recent one. That's when Blackwell became more attentive. Zeke cursed under his breath. They suspect you're connected to me. Possibly, Tamara acknowledged, but I gave them no reason to be certain. I mentioned treating a minor injured in an accident, a cowboy who shot himself in the foot, and a traveler who was robbed on the road to Laramie. All true, all patients I've actually had, she confirmed. I simply didn't specify which one might be you. Zeke nodded, impressed by her careful approach. Did you learn anything about Thomas Blackwell? Not directly, but I overheard James speaking to one of his men before they noticed me. He said something about finally having a solid lead after 2 years of searching. Tamara's gaze was troubled. Zeke, he believes with absolute certainty that you killed his father. I've never heard the name before, Zeke insisted. Where would he even get the idea I was involved? I don't know, Tamara admitted, but his conviction seemed unshakable. She hesitated, then added, there's something else. The maid I was treating, she told me James Blackwell had been asking questions about you all over town, showing your picture, offering money for information. And in a town this size, someone's bound to tell him I've been staying here, Zeke concluded grimly. It's only a matter of time, Tamara agreed. We need to discover why he believes you killed his father. Without that information, you can't clear your name. Zeke moved to the clinic door, checking that it was securely locked. I'll need to confront him directly. Not yet, Tamara argued. Not until we know more. Let me ask around town first. Martha's husband works at the telegraph office. He might know if any messages about you or the Blackwells have come through. There isn't time for a gentle approach, Doc, Zeke countered. Those men could come through that door any moment. As if summoned by his words, a sharp knock sounded. Zeke and Tamara froze, exchanging alarmed glances. Zeke drew his revolver, motioning for Tamara to move away from the door. "Dr. Sullivan," a male voice called from outside. "It's James Blackwell. I'd like a word, if you please." Tamara's eyes widened, but she quickly composed herself. With a meaningful look at Zeke, she moved toward the back room, indicating he should hide there. Zeke shook his head emphatically, unwilling to leave her alone with the man hunting him. "Just a moment," Tamara called, her voice remarkably steady. She approached Zeke, speaking in an urgent whisper. "Trust me. Hide in the examination room. Leave the connecting door ajar so you can hear. If there's trouble, you can intervene, but this may be our best chance to learn his motives." Reluctantly, Zeke conceded to her plan. He moved silently into the adjoining room, positioning himself where he could see through the partially open door while remaining hidden from view. Tamara smoothed her skirts, took a deep breath, and opened the front door. James Blackwell stood on the threshold alone, though Zeke suspected his men were nearby. He was indeed young, barely into manhood, with a refined appearance that spoke of wealth and education. But his eyes held a hardness that belied his youth, a determined anger that made him dangerous. "Mr. Blackwell," Tamara greeted him with professional courtesy. "How may I help you?" "I apologize for the intrusion, Dr. Sullivan," James replied, his accent revealing Eastern origins. "I wondered if I might speak with you about a matter of some importance." "Of course." Tamara stepped aside to allow him entry, maintaining her composed demeanor. "Please come in." James entered cautiously, his gaze sweeping the clinic's main room before settling back on Tamara. "I'll be direct, doctor. I'm seeking a man named Zeke Garrison. I have reason to believe you may have treated him recently." Tamara's expression revealed nothing. "May I ask why you're looking for this man?" "He murdered my father 2 years ago in Denver," James stated flatly. "Shot him in the back outside our home and disappeared. I've been tracking him ever since." From his hiding place, Zeke frowned in confusion. He had been in Denver around that time, but he had no recollection of any confrontation with someone named Blackwell. "I'm sorry for your loss," Tamara said sincerely, "but I fail to see how I can assist you." "Information reached me that Garrison was wounded in Rawlins," James continued. "As the only physician in town, you would have treated him." "I treat many patients, Mr. Blackwell," Tamara replied evenly, "but I cannot discuss their identities or conditions. Medical confidentiality is a principle I take very seriously." James's expression hardened further. "This man is a murderer with a price on his head. Surely your ethical obligations don't extend to protecting criminals." "My ethical obligations extend to all who seek my care," Tamara countered firmly. "I cannot and will not violate a patient's privacy, regardless of what they may or may not have done." For a tense moment, James seemed ready to argue further. Then, surprisingly, his manner softened. "I understand your position, doctor. I respect your principles, even if they impede my quest for justice." He reached into his coat and withdrew a photograph, which he placed on the table between them. "This was my father, Thomas Blackwell. A businessman, a philanthropist, and the best father a son could ask for." Tamara picked up the photograph, studying it. From his vantage point, Zeke couldn't see the image, but he watched Tamara's face carefully for any reaction. "He looks like a good man," she said finally, handing the photograph back. "He was," James confirmed, a genuine grief shadowing his features. "He was returning home from a charity function when Garrison shot him. No provocation, no robbery attempt, just cold-blooded murder." "How can you be certain it was Mr. Garrison?" Tamara asked carefully. "Did you witness the shooting?" James shook his head. "I was away at university, but there were witnesses who identified him." A respected lawman from Wyoming territory who happened to be in Denver recognized him fleeing the scene. This detail caught Zeke's attention sharply. A lawman from Wyoming. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture he didn't like at all. "I see," Tamara said neutrally. "Again, I sympathize with your loss, but I cannot help you in your search." James studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. "I understand. Thank you for your time, Doctor." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One last question, if I may. The man who helped rescue those miners last week, I've heard he was staying with you during his recovery. Might I know his name? The town seems to regard him as something of a hero." The trap was cleverly laid, but Tamara didn't falter. "That would also fall under patient confidentiality, Mr. Blackwell. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful." "Of course." James smiled thinly. "Good day, Dr. Sullivan." After he departed, Tamara locked the door behind him and leaned against it, releasing a shaky breath. Zeke emerged from his hiding place, his expression grim. "You heard?" Tamara asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Every word." Zeke holstered his revolver. "And I think I understand what's happening now. You know who killed his father. I have a pretty good idea." Zeke's voice was tight with controlled anger. "That respected lawman from Wyoming who identified me has to be Marshal Wade Hollister." "Who is he?" Tamara moved away from the door, dropping into a chair as the tension of the encounter caught up with her. "A crooked lawman I had dealings with years ago," Zeke explained. "I caught him taking bribes to look the other way while cattle rustlers operated in the territory, reported him to his superiors. He lost his badge, his reputation. And now he's framed you for murder," Tamara concluded. "But why? Why not just come after you directly?" Hollister was always clever. "Direct revenge would be too obvious, especially after I exposed him." Zeke paced the small room. "This way he gets to watch me hunted, maybe killed without getting his hands dirty, and if I try to clear my name." "You'd have to find him," Tamara finished, walking right into whatever trap he set. "Exactly." Zeke stopped pacing, his decision made. "I need to leave. Now. Find Hollister before Blackwell and his men realize I'm here." "You're not fully healed," Tamara protested. "And leaving now would only confirm their suspicions about me harboring you." "Better suspicion than certainty," Zeke argued. "I can't put you in more danger than I already have." Tamara rose to her feet, facing him directly. "If you leave now, you'll be playing into Hollister's hands. You're wounded, outnumbered, and lacking proof of your innocence. That's exactly what he wants." "What do you suggest, then?" Zeke demanded. "Wait here until Blackwell returns with his men, until the whole town turns against you for helping me." "No," Tamara replied calmly. "I suggest we find evidence to clear your name. And how do we do that when the only man who knows the truth is the one who framed me? There must be records, witnesses." Tamara's mind was clearly working rapidly. If this Hollister was in Denver at the time of Thomas Blackwell's murder, there would be evidence of his presence, hotel registers, business transactions. "Denver's 100 miles away," Zeke pointed out. "But the telegraph office is just down the street," Tamara countered. "We can wire inquiries to contacts in Denver. I have a colleague at the hospital there who might help." Zeke considered her suggestion. It wasn't perfect, but it might buy them time. And the alternative, fleeing half-healed with bounty hunters on his trail, offered even less chance of success. "All right," he agreed reluctantly. "We'll try it your way, but if Blackwell makes a move against you, all bets are off." "Fair enough." Tamara's relief was visible. "I'll go to the telegraph office now. Martha's husband will be discreet." "Be careful," Zeke cautioned. "Blackwell's men are probably watching this building." "I'll use the back door and go through the alley," Tamara assured him. "I've lived in Rawlins long enough to know how to move about unobserved when necessary." As she prepared to leave, Zeke found himself gripped by an unfamiliar emotion, fear, not for himself, but for her. In the short time he'd known Tamara Sullivan, she had become important to him in ways he hadn't anticipated and wasn't entirely comfortable with. "Tamara," he called as she reached for her shawl. When she turned to him, he found himself momentarily at a loss for words. "Thank you for all of this. Not many would risk themselves for a stranger with my reputation." Her expression softened. "You're not a stranger anymore, Zeke. And I believe there's more to you than your reputation suggests." Before he could respond, she slipped out the back door, leaving him with her words echoing in his mind. More to him than his reputation suggested. Zeke wasn't certain that was true. But for the first time in years, he found himself hoping it might be. The afternoon stretched interminably as Zeke waited for Tamara's return. He alternated between watching the street from behind the curtains, cleaning his revolver, and pacing the confined space of the clinic. Every passing minute increased his concern for her safety. When the back door finally opened, he had his gun drawn before registering that it was Tamara. She entered quickly, her cheeks flushed from exertion, clutching a piece of paper. "I sent the telegrams," she reported. "And I received an immediate reply from one contact." She handed him the paper. Wade Hollister was indeed in Denver at the time of Thomas Blackwell's murder. He was there as a witness in a federal trial against a cattle rustling operation, the same one you exposed him for protecting. Zeke read the telegram, its terse words confirming Tamara's summary. "This connects him to Denver at the right time, but it doesn't prove he killed Blackwell or framed me." "No, but it's a start." Tamara removed her shawl. "My colleague at Denver Hospital is checking their records." Thomas Blackwell was apparently a major benefactor. If Hollister had any interaction with him during the trial, someone might remember. "It's thin," Zeke observed, though he appreciated her efforts. "Perhaps, but it's something," Tamara countered. "And I learned something else while in town. James Blackwell and his men have been asking very specific questions about you, not just your whereabouts, but details about your movements 2 years ago. They're trying to establish that you could have been in Denver at the time of the murder." "I was in Denver," Zeke admitted, "for about a week, delivering a prisoner to the territorial marshal's office." Tamara's eyes widened. "Why didn't you mention this before?" "Because I never encountered anyone named Blackwell during that time," Zeke explained. "I delivered my prisoner, collected the bounty, and moved on to the next job." "But your presence there strengthens their circumstantial case against you," Tamara pointed out. "Yes, it does," Zeke agreed grimly. "Which means waiting for more information by telegraph might be a luxury we can't afford. If Blackwell discovers I was in Denver when his father was killed, he won't wait for proof before coming after me." Tamara sank into a chair, the excitement of her information gathering fading as she confronted this reality. "Then what do we do?" Zeke made his decision. "I need to confront Blackwell directly. Tell him what I know about Hollister, try to convince him to investigate further before acting on his revenge." "He won't believe you," Tamara argued. "He's spent 2 years believing you murdered his father. A few words won't change that." "Probably not," Zeke conceded. "But it might make him hesitate long enough for us to find more concrete evidence. Or it might provoke him into immediate action," Tamara countered. "Zeke, this is too dangerous." "More dangerous than waiting for him to gather enough local testimony to be certain I'm the man he's looking for." Zeke shook his head. "At least this way I choose the time and place." Tamara studied him, clearly weighing their limited options. "When?" "Tonight," Zeke decided. "After dark, when there are fewer people about to get caught in the crossfire if things go wrong." "And where?" "The livery stable at the edge of town," Zeke replied after a moment's thought. It's isolated enough to avoid bystanders, but close enough to town that Blackwell won't suspect an ambush. How will you get him there? I won't, Zeke said. You will. Tamara's brow furrowed. Me, you'll send a message to his hotel room. Say you've reconsidered, that you have information about the man he's seeking, but you'll only meet him at the livery to avoid being seen by townspeople who might question your professional ethics. He'll suspect a trap. Maybe, Zeke acknowledged. But curiosity and the desire for vengeance are powerful motivators. I think he'll come, though not alone. He'll bring his men positioned to protect him. And when he realizes it's you he's meeting, not me, by then, I'll have made my case. Zeke's tone conveyed more confidence than he felt. Or at least created enough doubt to buy us more time. Tamara rose and paced the small room, clearly troubled by the plan. There must be a safer way. If you can think of one, I'm all ears, Zeke offered sincerely, but we're running out of options and time. After a long moment, Tamara sighed in resignation. Very well, I'll write the note. She fixed him with a stern look. But I'm not staying behind. If you're confronting them, I'm going to be there. Zeke started to object, then recognized the familiar stubborn set of her jaw. You'll stay hidden unless needed, he countered. No sense in both of us being targets. Agreed, Tamara conceded. But if you're shot again, I want to be close enough to help immediately. The matter settled, they spent the remaining hours of daylight preparing. Tamara wrote the note and arranged for it to be delivered to Blackwell's hotel room. Zeke checked and rechecked his revolver, acutely aware that his still-healing wound would slow his draw. As dusk approached, they slipped out the back door of the clinic and made their way through the alleyways of Rawlins toward the livery stable. The town was quieting for the evening, with most residents either at home or gathering at the saloon for drinks and cards. The livery was dark and quiet when they arrived, the horses settled for the night. Zeke positioned Tamara in an empty stall with a clear view of the main space but well protected by the solid wooden walls. Stay here no matter what happens, he instructed her. If things go badly, wait until they've gone, then get yourself to safety. And if things go well, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then we'll have more time to find the evidence we need, Zeke replied, avoiding the implication in her question that there might be a future beyond this immediate crisis. They didn't have long to wait. Within 20 minutes, the sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of James Blackwell. As Zeke had predicted, he didn't come alone. The silhouettes of his two companions were visible through the cracks in the livery walls, taking up positions outside. Blackwell entered cautiously, a pistol held ready in his hand. "Dr. Sullivan," he called softly. Zeke stepped out from the shadows, his own weapon holstered as a sign of good faith. "She's not here, Blackwell. It's me you wanted to talk to." The young man's reaction was immediate. He raised his pistol, aiming directly at Zeke's chest. "Garrison," he spat, "give me one reason not to kill you where you stand." "Because I didn't kill your father," Zeke replied calmly, making no move toward his own weapon. "I was in Denver, yes. But I never met Thomas Blackwell, and I certainly didn't shoot him." "Witnesses saw you fleeing the scene," Blackwell countered, his gun hand trembling slightly with emotion. "A lawman identified you specifically." "Wade Hollister," Zeke said, watching Blackwell's face carefully. "A corrupt marshal I exposed years ago, a man with every reason to want me dead or imprisoned." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the young man's features. "How do you know Hollister was the witness?" "Because he's the only Wyoming lawman who would have both recognized me and had reason to lie about what he saw," Zeke explained. "Check your sources, Blackwell. Who exactly gave you my name? Who pointed you in my direction after 2 years of searching?" Blackwell's gun didn't waver, but confusion now mingled with the anger in his expression. "Hollister approached me 3 months ago, said he'd been carrying the guilt of not coming forward sooner. He described seeing you fleeing the scene, recognizing you from your wanted posters." "Convenient timing," Zeke observed. "Did he happen to mention where he'd been for the past 2 years? Or why he suddenly developed a conscience?" "He said he'd been hunting you himself," Blackwell replied, a note of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "That he'd finally tracked you to Wyoming territory and thought I deserved to know." "And did he offer to help you find me?" Zeke pressed. "Perhaps suggest places to look, people to ask." The doubt in Blackwell's eyes deepened. "Yes. He's been sending telegrams with information about your movements." His gun lowered slightly. "Are you saying he deliberately misled me?" "I'm saying he used your grief and desire for justice to serve his own vendetta," Zeke replied, allowing some sympathy to enter his tone. "I'm sorry about your father, truly, but I wasn't the one who killed him." "Prove it," Blackwell demanded, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "I'm trying to," Zeke told him. "We've sent telegrams to Denver, seeking information about Hollister's activities there during the time your father was killed, but I need you to hold off on any action until we have answers." "We?" Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "You and the doctor, I presume. Is she here after all?" Before Zeke could respond, the livery door burst open, and one of Blackwell's men stumbled in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Ambush!" he gasped. Men outside, his warning was cut short by a gunshot that echoed through the wooden structure. The man crumpled to the ground, revealing a figure standing in the doorway, a tall, gray-haired man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his coat, smoke still curling from the barrel of his revolver. "Hello, Zeke," Wade Hollister greeted with a cold smile. "Been a while." In the stall where Tamara was hidden, she pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. The situation had just become infinitely more dangerous. She reached for the small derringer she had brought with her, knowing it would offer little protection but unwilling to be completely defenseless. "Hollister," Zeke acknowledged, his posture tense but controlled. "Should have known you'd show up to admire your handiwork." The corrupt lawman stepped further into the livery, keeping his gun trained on Zeke. "I've been following young Blackwell here since Denver, making sure he stayed on the right track." His gaze shifted to James. "Don't let him confuse you, son. This is the man who shot your father in cold blood." Blackwell looked between the two men, uncertainty evident in his expression. "He says you framed him, that you had a grudge because he exposed your corruption." "Of course he'd say that," Hollister replied smoothly. "Man facing a murder charge will say anything to save his skin." He took another step forward. "But consider this: why would I track down my own father's killer if I wasn't certain of his guilt?" Zeke's eyes narrowed at the slip. "Your father," he repeated, watching comprehension dawn on Blackwell's face. Hollister's expression hardened. "Figure of speech. I meant your father, of course." But the damage was done. James Blackwell's gun was now pointed at Hollister, not Zeke. "What connection did you have to my father?" he demanded. "You told me you merely happened to be in Denver and witnessed the murder." "I misspoke," Hollister insisted, but his credibility was crumbling. "The point is, Garrison is the killer. I saw him." "Or you did it yourself," Zeke suggested, carefully shifting position to keep both men in view. "Was Thomas Blackwell connected to your cattle rustling operation somehow? Did he discover something that threatened you during that federal trial?" Hollister's composure slipped further. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I think I do," Zeke pressed, seeing the man's growing agitation. "Blackwell was a philanthropist, a man concerned with civic matters. What if he uncovered evidence of your corruption while you were in Denver?" Evidence that could have sent you to prison instead of just costing you your badge. James Blackwell's face had gone pale with dawning comprehension. My father mentioned a corrupt lawman from Wyoming in his last letter to me, he said quietly. He wrote that he discovered evidence of judicial tampering in a federal case and intended to bring it to the authorities. Hollister's expression twisted with rage. Your father was a meddling fool who couldn't mind his own business, he snarled, his careful facade finally cracking. He would have ruined everything with his self-righteous crusading. So you killed him, Blackwell concluded, his voice hollow with the realization, and framed an innocent man. Innocent, Hollister laughed bitterly. Garrison's killed more men than both of us combined. One more murder on his ledger wouldn't make a difference. It made a difference to me, Blackwell shouted, his gun hand trembling with emotion. 2 years of my life spent hunting the wrong man. The tension in the livery had reached a breaking point. Hollister, seeing his elaborate revenge scheme unraveling, made his decision. In one fluid motion, he swung his revolver toward Blackwell, clearly intending to eliminate the young man and deal with Zeke afterward. Zeke's reaction was instantaneous. Despite his healing wound, he drew and fired in a single, practiced movement. His bullet caught Hollister in the shoulder, spoiling his aim. The corrupt lawman's shot went wide, splintering the wooden wall behind Blackwell. With a howl of pain and rage, Hollister fired again, this time at Zeke. The bullet grazed Zeke's arm as he dove for cover behind a stack of hay bales. James Blackwell had also taken shelter, firing back at Hollister from behind a support post. The livery erupted into chaos. Horses screamed in their stalls, panicked by the gunfire. Hollister's second man, hearing the shots, rushed in through the back entrance, his own weapon drawn. He fired blindly in Zeke's direction, forcing him deeper into cover. From her hiding place, Tamara watched in horror as the gunfight escalated. She could see Zeke was pinned down, caught in crossfire between Hollister and his remaining henchmen. Blood seeped through his shirt sleeve where the bullet had grazed him, and she could tell from his movements that his original wound was causing him pain. Making a split-second decision, Tamara aimed her derringer at a lantern hanging near the livery entrance. Her shot shattered the glass, sending burning oil spilling onto the hay-strewn floor. Flames leapt up immediately, creating a barrier between Hollister and the back entrance where his man stood. The fire had the desired effect. Hollister cursed and backed away from the spreading flames, momentarily distracted. Zeke seized the opportunity, rising from his cover to fire a carefully aimed shot. His bullet found its mark, striking Hollister in the chest. The corrupt lawman staggered backward, surprise etched on his features. He fired one last wild shot before collapsing to the ground, his revolver clattering from his lifeless fingers. The remaining gunman, seeing his employer fall and the fire spreading rapidly, made the prudent choice to flee through the back door, disappearing into the night. "Tamara," Zeke called, scanning the livery for her as the flames began to consume the dry wood and hay. "We need to get out now." She emerged from her hiding place, rushing to his side. "The horses," she reminded him. "We can't leave them to burn." Together they quickly opened the stall doors, allowing the panicked animals to escape. As they worked, James Blackwell joined them, his youthful face streaked with soot and tears. "He was lying to me all along," he said, more to himself than to them. "Using me to settle his own score." "We can discuss it outside," Zeke urged, coughing as smoke filled the livery. "This whole place is going up." They managed to free the last horse just as the roof beams began to creak ominously. Tamara led the way toward the door, but a burning timber crashed down, blocking their path. The only exit now was through the back, past Hollister's body and through increasingly thick smoke. Zeke grabbed Tamara's hand, pulling her close to his side as they navigated the burning building. Blackwell followed behind them, coughing violently in the smoke. When they finally burst out into the clean night air, the entire town of Rawlins appeared to be gathering, drawn by the commotion and the sight of the blazing livery. Sheriff Daniels pushed through the crowd, his expression a mixture of alarm and confusion as he took in the three soot-covered figures. What in God's name happened here? Before Zeke could respond, James Blackwell stepped forward. Wade Hollister murdered my father in Denver 2 years ago, he stated clearly, his voice carrying to the assembled townspeople. He framed Zeke Garrison for the crime and manipulated me into hunting an innocent man. When the truth was revealed tonight, he tried to kill us all. A murmur ran through the crowd. Sheriff Daniels looked to Zeke for confirmation. It's true, Zeke affirmed. Hollister's body is still inside if the fire hasn't consumed it yet. He was wearing a badge probably fake, given that he was dismissed from service years ago. Daniels nodded slowly, taking in this information. I'll need statements from all of you, he said finally. But that can wait until Dr. Sullivan has tended to your injuries. As if his words had reminded her of her profession, Tamara immediately turned her attention to Zeke's wounded arm. We need to get you back to the clinic, she insisted. That bullet wound needs cleaning, and your original injury may have been aggravated by all this exertion. Zeke didn't argue. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving him acutely aware of the pain in both his side and arm. But more than the physical discomfort, he felt a profound weariness and, unexpectedly, relief. For the first time in years, he stood in public view without the weight of his reputation as his primary identity. To the people of Rawlins, he was now the man who had saved miners and exposed a murderer, not just a notorious gunslinger. As Tamara led him through the crowd back toward her clinic, James Blackwell fell into step beside them. I owe you an apology, he said quietly to Zeke. I was so blinded by grief and the desire for vengeance that I never questioned Hollister's story. Grief makes fools of the wisest men, Zeke replied without rancor. And Hollister was clever. He played on your pain, used it for his own purposes. Still, Blackwell persisted, I nearly killed an innocent man. That's not something I can easily forgive in myself. Then learn from it, Zeke advised, thinking of his own regrets, the lives he'd taken that perhaps hadn't deserved ending. Let it teach you to question more deeply, to seek truth instead of simple answers. The young man nodded thoughtfully. I will, and I'll make this right clear your name properly. When I return to Denver, I'll ensure the false charges against you are withdrawn and the true story of my father's murder is known. I'd appreciate that, Zeke acknowledged. They had reached the clinic. Tamara unlocked the door and ushered Zeke inside, with Blackwell following. As she busied herself preparing to treat Zeke's new wound, James lingered awkwardly near the door. I'll be leaving for Denver in the morning, he announced. But I wanted to thank you both. Despite everything, you showed me more compassion than I deserved. Everyone deserves the chance to know the truth, Tamara replied, looking up from her medical supplies. Even when it's painful. After Blackwell departed, promising to return before his journey to provide a formal statement clearing Zeke's name, Tamara turned her full attention to her patient. She cleaned and bandaged his arm wound, then checked the original injury in his side. Remarkably, you haven't torn your stitches again, she informed him with a mixture of surprise and approval. Though not for lack of trying, you've been extraordinarily lucky, Zeke Garrison. Not luck, he countered softly, watching her efficient movements as she worked. Good care. Tamara's hand stilled momentarily at his words, then resumed their task. "Perhaps a combination of both," she allowed, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. As she finished dressing his wounds, a comfortable silence settled between them. The events of the night had changed things, Zeke knew. The immediate danger had passed. His name would be cleared. There was no longer any reason for him to remain in Tamara's clinic or in Rawlins at all. "What will you do now?" Tamara asked, as if reading his thoughts. She busied herself putting away her medical supplies, not meeting his eyes. "With the bounty removed and your reputation restored, I imagine you'll be moving on soon." Zeke considered the question carefully. For years, his life had been defined by constant movement, by the next job, the next town. The idea of staying in one place, of building something more permanent, had seemed impossible for a man with his past. But now, looking at Tamara Sullivan, this remarkable woman who had saved his life, believed in his innocence, and shown him there might be more to him than the violence of his past, he found himself considering possibilities he'd long since abandoned. "I've been thinking about that," he replied slowly. "About what you said regarding change and choices." Tamara turned to face him fully, her expression carefully neutral. "And what have you concluded?" "That maybe it's time to try something different." Zeke met her gaze directly. "Sheriff Daniels mentioned yesterday that the town council's been looking to hire a deputy, someone who knows how to handle trouble but won't cause it themselves." Surprise flickered across Tamara's features, followed by cautious hope. "You're considering staying in Rawlins, becoming a lawman?" "Considering it," Zeke confirmed. "It's been a long time since I stood on the right side of the law. Might take some getting used to, but it feels right somehow." "I think you'd make an excellent deputy," Tamara said softly. "You have the skills, and despite what you might believe about yourself, you also have the judgment and compassion the job requires." "High praise from someone who first met me bleeding out on her operating table," Zeke remarked with a hint of a smile. "I prefer to think I've gotten to know you somewhat better since then," Tamara countered, returning his smile. "Though you remain perhaps the most stubborn patient I've ever treated." "Seems to me stubborn patients and stubborn doctors might be well matched," Zeke suggested, taking a careful step toward her. Tamara's smile deepened, though a blush colored her cheeks. "A valid hypothesis, Mr. Garrison, though it would require further observation to confirm." "I'm willing to provide ample opportunity for that observation, Dr. Sullivan." He closed the remaining distance between them. "If you're amenable." Instead of answering with words, Tamara reached up and gently laid her hand against his cheek. The simple touch held more tenderness than Zeke had experienced in years. He covered her hand with his own, turning slightly to press a kiss against her palm. "I can't promise to be an easy man to care for," he said quietly. "I've lived with violence for so long, it's part of me now. There are nightmares, regrets that won't ever fully fade." "I'm not asking for promises, Zeke," Tamara replied. "Only honesty, and perhaps the chance to discover who we might be to each other given time." "Time," he repeated, savoring the word and all it implied. "That's something I haven't allowed myself to think about in years, a future beyond the next day or week." "Then perhaps it's time you started," Tamara suggested. She hesitated briefly before adding, "with me if you're willing." In answer, Zeke lowered his head and kissed her gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. Her arms came up around his neck, mindful of his injuries but pulling him closer nonetheless. When they finally separated, both somewhat breathless, Zeke rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said that day after the mine collapse," he confessed. "About not being fixable. There are parts of me broken beyond repair, things I've been, that can't be undone." Tamara drew back slightly to look into his eyes, her gaze steady and sure. "Then I'll just hold the broken parts," she promised softly. "We all have them, Zeke. Pieces of ourselves that will never quite heal. The trick isn't fixing them, it's finding someone who accepts them as part of who you are, while helping you become who you might yet be." In her words, Zeke found something he'd stopped believing in years ago: hope. Not for complete redemption or for the erasure of his past, but for the possibility of a future built alongside someone who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. As dawn broke over Rawlins, Wyoming, casting golden light through the clinic windows, Zeke Garrison, gunslinger, bounty hunter, and now perhaps future deputy, held closely to the woman who had saved more than just his life. Together, they stepped tentatively toward a future neither had imagined possible mere weeks ago. It was not a perfect beginning. There would be challenges ahead: the adjustment to a settled life, the integration into a community that had known him first as a notorious gunman, the slow building of trust between two people accustomed to independence and self-reliance. But as Tamara had said, perfection wasn't the goal. Acceptance, understanding, and the courage to change, these were the foundations on which they would build. And for a man who had spent years believing himself beyond salvation, that was more than enough. 3 months later, Deputy Zeke Garrison stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, watching as Rawlins awakened to another busy day. The town had grown noticeably even in the short time since he'd pinned on the badge, with new businesses opening and settlers arriving by train each week. Progress was inevitable in these boom times, bringing both prosperity and the complications that came with rapid growth. "Morning, Deputy," called Martha as she passed by on her way to the clinic. "Dr. Sullivan said to remind you about dinner tonight." Zeke tipped his hat to the older woman. "Tell her I haven't forgotten. 6 o'clock sharp." Martha smiled knowingly. The relationship between the town's doctor and its newest lawman was common knowledge in Rawlins, subject of much good-natured gossip but generally approved. Zeke's actions in the mine rescue and his exposure of Wade Hollister had earned him a measure of respect that his subsequent months of fair and efficient service as deputy had only strengthened. Sheriff Daniels emerged from the office behind him, coffee cup in hand. "Quiet night." "Quiet enough," Zeke confirmed. "Broke up a fight at the saloon around midnight. Nothing serious." "Good." Daniels sipped his coffee, surveying the street with the satisfaction of a man who took pride in his town's relative peace. "Got a telegram from the federal marshal in Cheyenne. They're officially closing the investigation into Hollister. Seems young Blackwell provided them with enough evidence to posthumously charge Hollister with Thomas Blackwell's murder." "Good to have it official," Zeke remarked, though the news wasn't unexpected. James Blackwell had been true to his word, working diligently to clear Zeke's name and establish Hollister's guilt. "Also got this," Daniels added, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "Letter for you from Denver. Figured it might be important." Zeke took the envelope, recognizing James Blackwell's handwriting. He opened it, scanning the neatly written pages as the sheriff waited with poorly concealed curiosity. "News," Daniels finally prompted. "Blackwell's established a foundation in his father's name," Zeke explained. "Funding for law enforcement reform and support for victims of violence. Says he was inspired by what happened, wants something good to come from his father's death and his own misguided quest for vengeance." "Admirable," the sheriff commented. "Boy seems to have found his purpose." "Seems so." Zeke folded the letter, thinking of his own unexpected new purpose. "He also mentions he's considering studying law, wants to become a prosecutor." "World needs good ones," Daniels observed. He drained his coffee cup and straightened. "Well, I'm heading to the bank, then the mayor's office." Town council meeting tonight. They're discussing funding for a proper jail addition. You should stop by, show your support." "After dinner," Zeke promised. "Tamara's been planning this meal for days. Something about celebrating 3 months since I took the badge." Daniels chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the day when Zeke Garrison cared more about keeping a dinner appointment than attending a town meeting. Dr. Sullivan's been good for you." As the sheriff walked away, Zeke reflected that Daniels's assessment, while simple, was profoundly true. Tamara had been good for him. Her presence in his life had anchored him in ways he hadn't thought possible, giving him reason to truly invest in his new role and the community around him. Their relationship had developed gradually over the past months, neither of them rushing what both recognized as something precious and potentially lasting. Zeke still maintained his room at the boarding house, though he spent most evenings at Tamara's home behind the clinic, often simply talking late into the night or reading companionably by lamplight. The town had adjusted to their courtship with surprising acceptance. There had been some initial whispers, of course, about the propriety of the lady doctor becoming involved with a former gunslinger, but those had largely faded as Zeke proved himself in his new role, and their relationship maintained a respectful public face. By mid-afternoon, Zeke had completed his regular patrol of the town, settled a minor property dispute between 2 merchants, and helped unload supplies at the general store when one of the regular workers failed to appear. It was the kind of day that would have seemed impossibly mundane to him a year ago, but now brought its own satisfaction, the knowledge that he was contributing to the order and well-being of a community that had, against all odds, become his own. As promised, he arrived at Tamara's home precisely at 6 o'clock, having taken extra care with his appearance. He'd trimmed his beard, donned a clean shirt, and left his deputy's badge at the office. Tonight was not about his official role but his personal one. Tamara greeted him at the door, and the sight of her momentarily took his breath away. She wore a dress of deep blue that he hadn't seen before, her copper hair arranged more elaborately than her usual practical style. But it was her smile, warm and genuine, that affected him most deeply. "You look beautiful," he said simply, stepping inside. "Thank you." Her eyes appraised him appreciatively. "You clean up rather well yourself, Deputy Garrison." The meal she had prepared was more elaborate than their usual fare: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and even a pie for dessert. As they ate, Tamara spoke of her day at the clinic, the arrival of new medical supplies she'd ordered from Chicago, her plans to train Martha in more advanced nursing skills. "And Mrs. Peterson finally delivered her baby," she added with evident satisfaction. "A healthy boy after 3 girls." Her husband looked ready to float right out of the room with pride. Zeke smiled, enjoying her enthusiasm. Tamara loved her work with a passion that matched his own former dedication to bounty hunting, but with far more positive results. "You're making a real difference here," he observed. "People trust you." "As they're coming to trust you," she countered. "Sheriff Daniels told me yesterday that complaints are down nearly 30% since you joined the force." "Probably just coincidence," Zeke demurred, still uncomfortable with praise. "I doubt that very much." Tamara set down her fork, her expression growing more serious. "You found your place here, Zeke. A role that uses your skills for protection rather than violence. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." Her words warmed him in ways he was still learning to accept. For so long, his measure of success had been simpler survival, the next bounty, the maintenance of a reputation fearsome enough to keep most trouble at a distance. This new form of achievement, earning trust, building relationships, becoming part of something larger than himself, was unfamiliar territory. "Couldn't have done it without you," he acknowledged. You saw something in me worth saving when most would have written me off as a lost cause. I saw a man whose actions belied his reputation, Tamara corrected gently. You saved yourself, Zeke. I merely provided medical care and perhaps a bit of encouragement. After dinner, they sat together on the small porch behind her home, watching as twilight settled over the distant mountains. It had become their custom in recent weeks, this quiet sharing of the day's end. 3 months, Zeke mused, thinking of Daniels's earlier comment, doesn't seem possible. Having second thoughts about settling down, Tamara asked, a hint of concern in her voice. No, he replied immediately. Just surprised at how quickly it's begun to feel, right? She smiled, relieved. I know what you mean. I came to Rawlins expecting to build a practice, not a life. Yet here we are. Here we are, Zeke echoed, taking her hand in his. The gesture had become natural between them, this simple connection that spoke of deeper bonds forming. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, until Zeke reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. I've been carrying this around for a week now, he admitted. Waiting for the right moment. Tamara's eyes widened as she saw what he held, a simple gold ring with a small, solitary diamond. Zeke, I'm not good with fancy words, he began, his voice rougher than usual with emotion. And I know 3 months isn't a long time. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of how I feel about you, Tamara. Her eyes glistened in the fading light as he continued. You know what I was. You've helped me see what I could be. I love you for accepting the broken parts and for believing in the whole. He held out the ring. I can't promise a perfect life. My past will always be there, and this job isn't without risks. But I can promise to love you, respect you, and stand beside you for as long as you'll have me. Will you marry me, Tamara Sullivan? Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she nodded, momentarily speechless with emotion. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, I will marry you, Zeke Garrison. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Zeke felt a sense of completion unlike anything he'd known before. The journey that had brought him to this moment, from wounded gunslinger to respected deputy, from solitary wanderer to a man deeply connected to another soul, seemed both improbable and inevitable. Later that night, after they had shared the news with Sheriff Daniels at the town council meeting, receiving congratulations from all present, Zeke walked back to his room at the boarding house. Their wedding would change this arrangement, of course, but for tonight, they maintained the proprieties that mattered in a small town like Rawlins. As he prepared for sleep, Zeke caught sight of himself in the small mirror above his wash basin. The face that looked back at him was both familiar and strange, the same features, the same scars, but somehow transformed by the experiences of the past months. By hope, by love, by the belief that redemption, while never complete, was nevertheless possible. He thought of Tamara's words the night they had confronted their feelings for each other. Then I'll just hold the broken parts. She had done more than that, he reflected. She had shown him that those broken parts did not define the whole, that a life could be rebuilt around them, incorporating rather than erasing the past. 6 weeks later, on a clear autumn day, Zeke Garrison and Tamara Sullivan were married in Rawlins's small church. The entire town seemed to attend, a testament to how completely both had been embraced by the community. Sheriff Daniels stood as Zeke's best man, while Martha served as Tamara's matron of honor. As they spoke their vows before friends and neighbors who had once been strangers, Zeke marveled at the unexpected turns life could take. A random bullet, a stubborn doctor, a mining accident, a false accusation, each had been a link in the chain that had led him to this moment of profound transformation. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zeke looked into Tamara's eyes, and saw reflected there all that he had found in Rawlins, Wyoming: acceptance, purpose, and the promise of a future built on honesty and love. A future where the broken parts were held gently, where the whole was greater than the sum of its scars. It was not the ending he had ever envisioned for himself, a reformed gunslinger finding peace as a lawman, married to a doctor who had saved more than just his physical wounds. But as he kissed his bride to the cheers of their newfound community, Zeke Garrison knew it was the ending, or rather, the beginning that he had always needed. And in the years that followed through the birth of their children, the growth of the town, the inevitable challenges and joys of a life shared, that knowledge only deepened. A foundation as solid as the mountains that watched over Rawlins, and the love that had found them both when neither was looking for it.